My name is Chandra Walker, and I serve as Library Director here at Georgia College. So on behalf of our administration, I'd like to welcome you to our program today. I am joined today by my colleagues and members of Georgia College's AAC&U Institute on Open Education team, Jennifer Towns, our scholarly communication librarian, LaMonica Sanford, who's our assessment librarian, and Jacqueline Queen, who's an instructional designer in our Center for Teaching and Learning. We are delighted to have with us today our Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Costa Spiro, and our special guest, David Harris, who serves as Editor-in-Chief at OpenStax. David is also our faculty advisor for our participation in the AAC&U Institute on Open Education. So we're delighted to have him with us today as well. For our program, we're going to start out with some opening remarks by Provost Spiro, followed by an introduction for David by Jennifer Towns, and then we'll go right into David's presentation. So again, thank you for joining. I'll turn it over to you now, Dr. Spiro. If you have any questions during the program, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll prompt David as appropriate. We'll also save time at the end for any questions that you may have. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Spiro. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm so thrilled that Georgia College is participating in AAC&U's inaugural Institute an Open Education resource. And I'm really pleased that Dr. Walker has provided the leadership as well as our colleagues in the library and that joined that effort and faculty members to be part of this effort. It's very, very important, very critical for institutions of higher education to be exploring all the latest developments in obviously in publishing, in professional development, and all these areas are so critical. So I want to thank you very, very much for that. Also, I just want to welcome our assigned faculty mentor, David Harris, Editor-in-Chief at OpenStax. Thank you so much for being part of our effort, for contributing to our learning experience, and for helping our university succeed. It's the publishing industry or the publishing business or that whole area has changed so much. I could say that I've been involved in it for probably I'm trying to think about 25 or 30 years, and I've seen enormous changes that have taken place. And I do remember, like many others, when we were always attempted to assemble as many books as possible into a location, and all that is gone. I also know from an administrative perspective, the investments that we have made to try to digitize material and make that information available. So I want to thank you for providing us with your expertise, your insights to help us strengthen our position in this particular area. A couple of observations to make. One is about the importance of accessible resources. It's such a critical element of higher education for a lot of reasons. When we talk about student success, at a time when we want to open up higher education as much as possible and to provide students with opportunities to gain access to opportunities to strengthen their skills, and at the same time there is a force that stands opposite to that in some ways, and that is the expense of higher education. These two forces actually are contradictory to each other. We've seen the cost of higher education increase. We've seen access to materials has gotten more expensive. I've seen publishers operating in so many different creative ways, if you will, to try to maintain access to markets. And at the same time, we have students that are coming with extensive needs that they need to get access to the information. I suspect that that whole area of open education resource has changed very much over the years. Certainly, I do remember years ago some of the first efforts, but I know that it's gotten so much more. It's gotten so much more comprehensive and so much more effective and efficient that really the opportunities for our students are enormous. We have attempted this at Georgia College. Dr. Walker and my colleagues can talk more about this through a USG initiative here, the Affordable Learning Georgia program. And we've had many faculty that have participated in that. I think that goes all the way back to 2014. We've had about 8 grants, if I remember correctly. However, more needs to be done in that area. And I think that's the purpose of our effort here, is to engage the faculty, engage our colleagues to look at the opportunities that exist. So again, thank you for gathering together. Once again, I welcome David to the group here. Thank you to our faculty and all those participating in the AAC&U's inaugural Institute on Open Education resource. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Walker. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Spiro, for those comments. So many of us may be familiar with David and the great work of OpenStax, but for those who may not be very familiar, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Towns now to do a brief introduction, and then we'll get started with the program. So off to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Chandra. It's my pleasure to introduce David Harris today. As we've mentioned before, he is the editor-in-chief for OpenStax at Rice University. David has worked with OpenStax since 2011 and has been responsible for the editorial development of resources that are used by over 4.4 million students annually. David has worked extensively with the post-secondary community on issues dealing with access, adoption, and adaptation of emerging OER resources. At OpenStax, David contributes to the team's effort of improving access to high-quality materials by working with authors, developers, and by supporting our emerging ecosystem. So join me in welcoming David Harris.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that warm welcome. And thank you, Provost Sparrow, for your great reflections and comments on the state of the publishing industry, OER, and higher education. We're certainly in very interesting times, and it's such a pleasure to be working with Chandra, Jennifer, LaMonica, and Jacqueline on their initiative to drive OER at scale. The great news is that you have a great track record of success in Georgia. Affordable Learning Georgia is one of the shining lights in the country in regards to scaling OER effectively and adapting OER for local use. So what I thought we'd do today was spend a little bit of time on what OpenStax is, what we do, and then how we develop the resources so that they can scale widely. And then we'll spend a little bit of time looking at the impacts. And then because COVID is such a tremendous impact on the way the students are acquiring and using information, I thought it would be good to spend a little bit of time looking ahead. Where is this going? And then we will have a discussion. If you have any questions as we go through this, please put it into the chat, and then I can make sure that we can answer that hopefully just in time. So let's start out with OER 101. The most common misconception is that open education resources don't carry a copyright. They do. So all of the resources that OpenStax develops is actually copyrighted under Rice University, because we're a nonprofit publisher based at Rice. However, what is different than a traditional publisher is the license that is applied. So when you go and adopt a material from Pearson, they have what is called an all rights reserved license, meaning that you can basically consume it, but not do much else. The open licenses, which are created by Creative Commons, have varying degrees of restrictions. So the most open, the CC BY license, is what we use at OpenStax. That means you can take the material, you can adapt it and redistribute it without permission. Yet all you need to do is just provide attribution back to the original source. Then you will see that there are restrictions that can be put on to these licenses. So the most common one that people would put on would be a CC BY NC license, which basically means that you cannot use this material for commercial use. We have one or two resources that carry that license because an agreement that we made to be able to use it. But that's a commonly used license. If you are creating your own materials or deriving materials that have open components, the general rule of thumb is if you have elements that have CC BY, but then there are materials in there that have a CC BY NC license, what the recommendation is just put on the more restrictive license, and then you'll make sure you've got it covered. So that's the basic thing about the licensing. Everything we're talking about today, though, is openly licensed, free for you to take and adapt for your students. So let's talk about some strategies that have resulted in scale. And these are the strategies that we've been taking at OpenStax and will continue to take. We recognize that technology platforms require content, and content is enhanced by technology. These two don't live independently. We do no longer just live in a text environment. We live in a blended asynchronous learning environments. OpenStax, we've now published more first editions in the last 5 years than all of the major publishers combined, which I think is an interesting statement on the changes in the publishing industry. 60% of 2- and 4-year colleges now use at least one OpenStax text, and this year we'll have over 4.8 million students using these resources, and resulting in over $1 billion of savings. What I think is even more important is where research is being done in terms of the use of OER. Eddie Watson out of University of Georgia, when he was there, did a study across 20,000 students. And those students who were on Pell Grants, typically it lowered the DFW rates, which was very exciting to see. And there are many, many more studies which are coming out. So then the question becomes, how do you develop the resources to scale? Early OER efforts were very fragmented and localized in that the materials would work locally, but they wouldn't go from school to school. It would require too much adaptation. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to meet that challenge to make sure that these resources were the highest quality and would be discoverable. So we want to make sure it's easy to find materials. We recognize that free is not enough. You must have strict editorial controls to make sure that the quality is there. And one measure of quality or proxy measure of quality is what we call retention rate. So after someone adopts an OpenStax, let's say biology book, we survey the users and see if they will readopt. And our readoption rate is around 96%, which is very gratifying. And the #1 reason people don't readopt is because they're no longer involved with the course. We recognize that scope and sequence is critical. We need to develop resources that support existing curricula. So and we survey any market that we go into, psychology, sociology, economics, we survey hundreds of faculty and their syllabus. And the reality is about 85 to 90% of the courses, the syllabus is aligned. And so that's what we kind of work towards, to make sure that our resources will fit right into those courses, but give you the tools to adapt as you so need. And then finally, providing essential learning resources. As we mentioned earlier, this is, we're in an environment today where students are having blended learning experiences. It's much more than just a test book. It's courseware, or it's activities within an LMS, or it's flashcards. And so if we can't develop it ourselves, we will reach out to the community and partners to make sure that those resources are available to you. So let's take a moment and talk about the editorial process. The first thing that we do is we do a quantitative analysis of the competition. By competition, what I mean are materials that are costing $150, $200. So we look at the table of contents. We look at learning outcomes. We evaluate the art program. That's followed by a market survey analysis of what are some of the major teaching learning challenges in the market. And what this does is this creates a framework for which we can commence the editorial development process of the resources. So we have a multi-step process in terms of developing these resources, and that includes manuscript development, multiple rounds of reviewing, multiple rounds of editing, a comprehensive art production process, more reviewing, and then production. Frankly, if you looked at our model, and if you looked at a typical publisher model, you would actually not see a big difference. And I know that because I used to work at the major publishers, and there's something that technology can't do. This is an intellectual exercise when you're developing textbooks. You have to take complex ideas and make it accessible for students. And there's no way that technology can simplify that. That's still a very human endeavor. And that's why these steps are tried and true. This here is an example of a typical art specification. This is from our anatomy and physiology text. And this is the level of detail that you have to go into, is to make sure that these resources meet both faculty and student needs. So what does it take, for example? So our biology titles, which are now widely used, we had about 98 people working on those. You can see the number of writers and reviewers and art development editors. It takes an enormous amount of resources. And that's the reason why it's very important to really figure out what is the standard in the market that we have to work towards. Because you don't want to put in all these resources and then not have the resource adopted. That wouldn't help anyone. So this is an example of what we do in terms of laying up the resources, embedding interactive elements, etc. And that's the production process. And that's where OpenStax really differentiates from a traditional publisher. Is we have a publishing platform that allows us to publish in multiple formats, including accessible formats at the same time. We don't have to go in and manipulate files to put it into the Kindle or iBook or into a web view reader or make a PDF. We do that from a single file, and that saves us an enormous amount of time. That's a great benefit. So the question I always get is, how easy is it to use OpenStax? And let me just show you very quickly here how easy it is. So let's say let's go into social sciences, and I'm just going to pick our economics 2E text. If you're a student, you come here, or a faculty member, you can see the table of contents. And if you were teaching economics, you would say, well, this really maps the scope and sequence of my course. And then the students can view the resource online. Let me just click on that. And then it will take you directly into the resource. What you'll notice is several things. You'll notice that I didn't have to log in. There is no password or username required. We are not tracking any student behavior. We do give students the opportunity to create an account so they can highlight, take notes, ask questions. That does require an account, but that is not mandatory. The students can also download a PDF if they want, and they can also download a free Kindle version. Our goal is to meet students where they are, if they're online, offline, or whatever platform that they're using. For instructors, we have premium cartridges. I'm going to mention that a little bit later, that will embed within your LMS. And then we have a whole array of resources, PowerPoint slides, assessment items, transition guides, etc., to help you utilize these resources. In addition, because many of these are platform markets, meaning that people like to use online homework, we can't do it all of ourselves. So we have technology partners that provide online homework. For instance, WebAssign is a partner of OpenStax. Newton from Wiley is a partner. Expert TA. There's over 50 ecosystem partners that provide you with the choice that you need. So it's that easy. All you need to do is just provide the link to the student and they can get instant access, or you can embed the resource into your LMS. You are in full control. And of course, you can adapt it. You can adapt it too. Are there any questions in the chat about that? Okay, great. So let's keep moving on here. You can see how it's easier to use. And so what's the impact of all of this? The ecosystem, high quality content. Well, we call it the network effect. And what's happened is that it's created an unbundling. Affordable Learning Georgia really kind of accelerated this back in 2014. So we have a distribution network. We have service providers and institutions now that are really driving choice for faculty. No longer are people locked into a specific author or a specific platform. You can choose the OER that you want, and then you can choose from a myriad of platform providers and also a myriad of distribution providers. It's really putting control back in the faculty. In fact, one of the most important things that we support at OpenStax is academic freedom. We believe that you know what is best for your course, and you should ultimately make the decision. Okay, so we've talked about how we develop the resources. We've talked about how they've scaled. I failed to mention that we're in about 45 disciplines now. And then we've talked about the network effect that's giving you more choice than ever before. And so the result of all this is that we have about 5 million students using OpenStax resources a year, which is great. But a lot is changing in the market right now because of COVID. You've experienced this, you know this better than anyone. And so when we're looking ahead now, we look at OER, we think in terms of student engagement, especially if they're in blended and asynchronous courses. We're hearing a lot about academic integrity and of course, affordability. So I thought it would be useful just to take a moment to touch on these and how OER intersects with these market dynamics. Let me just ask a quick question. Do you think engagement, academic integrity, and affordability are issues that you're dealing with in your classes and programs? Maybe you can put the thumbs up. Great. So I see a few of those. Okay, great. And if there are others that you think we should address, please feel free to put that in the chat. Okay, so let's talk about areas that are gaining ground and losing momentum right now in the market as it relates to what we're talking about. Great news, DEI is actually gaining ground, the focus on that, and that's going to have a huge impact on the content that we develop. Competency workforce-based institutions are seeing growth. Community colleges have seen a decline in enrollments. B2C models are gaining ground, and that's not always a good thing, and we'll talk about that. Affordability has been gaining ground, which is good news. OER has been gaining ground, and then at the traditional courseware in COVID gained ground, and the unpredicted has definitely been gaining ground. What's been losing momentum? As I said, DEI community colleges, sometimes the perceived value of general education courses. The students, why do I have to take this? That has a big impact on OER, and I'll explain that in a minute. The courseware startup are having a tough time. And in some disciplines, academic freedom has lost some ground. And there's a variety of reasons. So I think what we can tell from this is we're in a period of great change in the market. And the question is, how do we respond? So one of the most critical areas that OER needs to be thinking about is in the area of relevancy. Why is this educational? Why is this course important to me? I think this quote from AQ is excellent. The perceived value of education decreases when students don't see the relevancy of it. And that's driving a lot of different behaviors and justifying some behaviors around academic integrity, which we will talk about in a minute. And so why should OpenStax be concerned with the perceived value of education? Well, we should be concerned with that because the resources that we develop are a reflection of the courses that you teach. And so we obviously want the students to benefit from materials that they see of great value. And so that's where we definitely intersect with the great work that you're doing. How should OpenStax or OER think about relevancy in regard to the resources that we develop? How do we make these more meaningful learning experiences for students? And so that they kind of make the connection to their lives. And then finally, how does moving into blended and asynchronous environments impact the needs in regards to relevancy and engagement? As you know, last year there was this rush to online courses. And to be really frank, you know, I've speak to quite a few students. My children are just at college age now, and they don't love the online course. The ones I've spoken with, they don't love the online courses that much. And they certainly don't love the Zoom courses. And I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. So one of the areas that we are making a shift in is in the quality and the depth of the supporting resources that we develop around the books. And we're trying to populate these within the LMS. So this is an example of a premium cartridge that we've developed for economics. And there's two main goals here that I want to emphasize. The first, number one goal is on the learning. We want to create resources that support the learning process and target learning outcomes, you know, the high level goals for that course, and making sure that we're providing you and students better maps to those learning outcomes. The third main goal here, number two is setup, making it easy to use. But the main goal here is under authentic assessment. And what do I mean by that? So the problem we have today, OpenStax has today with our assessments, and we are no different than a traditional publisher in this regard, in that the students can go to a course hero or a Chegg or a Bartleby, and they can go and put in our question that you might be using on a quiz, and they can get the answer in seconds. And so these assessments, frankly, are rarely assessing students' knowledge. They're assessing their ability to be able to get the answer or the solution. And that's not good enough. And so we need to think about authentic assessments that require that the students reflect on their learning experiences and personalize those responses. Now, to be absolutely frank with you, that may require a change in practice because these are much more difficult to automate the grading of them. And we recognize that that change in practice takes time. And also when you require a change in practice, that also slows down the scale side. So there's a lot of tension there. The provost mentioned that earlier. And so that's something that we're wrestling with the community. So how does this work? If you're familiar with an LMS cartridge, this will look very standard to you. So we divided the resources really into the workflow: pre-lecture, lecture, post-lecture, and independent study. And you can move anything behind, but we provide learning guidance. We ask students to reflect. There are discussion questions. The goal here is to make these make the student more active and to drive down the need to just go and search for the answer. So we're experimenting with this now, and hopefully next year we can give you an update on it. So let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the academic integrity piece. So the first question you're probably saying to yourself, I thought we were learning all about OER today. You are, but why should OER supporters care about academic integrity? The number one reason we are so concerned about this is because academic misconduct enhances inequity. It is not fair that a student who can go and get a paper written or can afford a subscription to Course Hero to get solutions is an advantage over the student who can't afford that. That drives inequity. We just don't think that's fair. And our entire mission is built about driving equity. The second question is, what type of society do we have when academic misconduct is normalized? We want to work in an environment in which academic conduct and academic integrity, that is the norm. And the other challenge that we're worried about is if this persists, then the value of the degree goes down, which means that the value of the resources that we're developing go down. And so what we're thinking about here is how do we make sure that we are part of the conversation and develop resources that help. So what is it a big deal? Are we overblowing the course for this? Not really. If you look at these major news articles from Forbes, New York Times, this is prevalent everywhere. And it's a difficult issue to talk about. And it's a difficult issue for OER to wrestle with, but wrestle with it we must, because if we can add value by developing those resources that decrease the need to go and just search for the answer. You may know that Pearson is actually now suing Chegg over intellectual property right infringement. That's not really about academic integrity, that's about control. But the indirect beneficiary actually may be academic integrity. So I think that's kind of interesting. So what is it? What are we talking about? So a lot of people think that we're just talking about the summative assessment. We're not. That used to be, but now it's the formative assessment, the weekly homework assignment. The problem is if you have misconduct there, it spills over into the summative. And I think the students en masse are victims here. They are getting so many messages that this is cool. Go and get your homework question answered. You can see it in as little as 30 minutes. Hire your personal essay writer today. Here are all the answers. And this is happening now at scale. You could argue that technology has amplified this. So when you have search misconduct, contract misconduct, at scale, you have a new verb that came out last year called chegging, believe it or not. And so it's happening in every classroom, at every institution. No one is immune. So that's why we are working diligently about this. So in regards to OER and all those resources we've developed, we are coming up with questions all the time. How can we work with the community to solve this issue? OER producers, we need to reflect on our work. How does it engage students? How do we make them part of the learning enterprise? What would you like us to do to better engage students? And how do we better provide resources to drive learning versus search and answer? This is really the next area that OER must continue to work on and expand so that the curriculum that we develop is of the highest value to you in your classroom. Okay, let's quickly close with affordability. So we have a DEI, we have engagement, learning, and then affordability is still a major issue. I think this is fascinating from Cengage. This they just published that according to students, the top two barriers are cost of living, cost of tuition, and course materials. Today in 2021, we mustn't lose sight of that. There are still too many students who are worried about putting food on the table versus getting the curriculum materials. And OER addresses this challenge, has addressed it, and will continue to address it. So what are the non-negotiables around affordability at OpenStax? High quality and free forever. We really, that is just critically important. The quality component, free is not enough. Openly licensed forever. So if OpenStax goes away, it's still used in the community. These are now your resources. And then if there are services that have to be paid for because of sustainability issues, the value must exceed the price. And the price must be accessible for virtually all students. And if it's not, we have to find ways to make it free for those students. So that's a key non-negotiable. And so that is something that we will continue to do. So I'll close with a question that we always get when we're speaking with groups like this is, okay, so you sound a little bit like a publisher. We are. And so the question always gets, okay, so what's the catch? What's the catch? What are you trying to sell? Really nothing, because we give virtually everything away for free. But we do ask for one. We just ask that you look at the materials, give them an honest evaluation. If you don't like them, let us know why so we can improve them. We do annual updates. And then if you do like what we're doing, please consider recommending them or adopting them, and then tell a colleague, because we have no salespeople. So I guess you could say that's the obligation. So that's a whirlwind tour of the current state of OER and where we see it going. And now if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, David, for your time and for the information that you shared today. I have more of a comment than a question,
Okay.
but I really appreciate the information that you shared about the review process for the OpenStax materials. I think when we talk about OER in general, there are a lot of misconceptions out there about the quality, and
yes,
the assumption is that the materials are not rigorously reviewed. The questions, perhaps the qualifications of the reviewers might be subject to debate. And so I really appreciate the information that you share about the great work that's being done at OpenStax and what you all have done to ensure a high quality review process while also offering a very affordable product. I think the assumption can be that those two things are in conflict with each other. Affordability and quality can't coexist. And I think the OpenStax project is a great example, the work that's been done there at Rice University, of how those two initiatives or those two desires can work hand in hand with each other.
Just one quick point on that is, so it wouldn't be possible for the great generosity from the Hewlett Foundation,
right,
Gates Foundation, and the other foundations. We have figured out how to make it sustainable too, and so we can do annual updates. But the building of the new book still takes philanthropy. And in regards to the reviewers and the authors, in the front of every single OpenStax book, we list their name and their affiliation. And so you can judge for yourself if we've tapped into some great scholars.
Gotcha. Thank you. Other questions or comments for David? So there's one in the chat, and I'll read it out.
Right.
Just a comment or a thanks. I'm a library assistant that's very interested in learning more about OER. Very interesting. Thank you, Alice. And what we'll do is we will make the recording of this available to all of the participants. David made some great points today. So if you'd like to follow up on any of those, you'll have this as a resource. But thank you for your comment.
So I've got a couple questions, if you don't mind. Maybe
sure. Go ahead.
So the academic integrity issue is fairly new to the OER community. Did people feel the points were valid? What's their general reaction to that?
Got a yes in the chat.
Okay.
I can only speak for myself and speak for our campus here. I've kind of heard some offside conversations about that issue, so I do feel it's relevant. I also think You know, you've mentioned COVID throughout your presentation. There's a lot more online learning that is taking place, and I think many of us may have hoped that we will return to some semblance of normalcy, but I think we've been in this thing so long, and the end is not in sight. And so I think some of the issues that we are starting to deal with will be with us for a while, and we'll have to address them.